This is unbelievable. See? People are like, what is the deal with Hans? And I'm like, do you listen to these interviews? I don't even have to do anything. He gives you just everything you could ever possibly want to work with in the world.
Hans Kim's coke problem. What I believe is the story behind his hiatus and replacement. In this video, I'm basically going to be going over Hans Kim's hiatus, his coke problem, and my theories about him being replaced by Casey Rocket and the show's shift towards sobriety. I was watching Kill Tony, episode 664, with my mom. Right after it was done, I pretty much came up with this theory and decided it was worth talking about. Hans Kim returns for the first time in 3 months. He hasn't been on in 12 episodes, I believe, unless I'm wrong. Maybe wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know. But the episode aired on 4/29/2024. This episode was different because all of the regulars were on the panel. Casey Rocket, Cam Patterson, William Montgomery, all on the panel. And David Jolly opened up the show, which he did good. He's always doing good. We had a feature from Uncle Laser. His set was whatever. I think that he's trying to lean more into comedy and not really being himself because of the episode where Roseanne Barr said that he didn't need to be vulgar or whatever.
You are a comedy innocent. You can make anything funny. Yeah. I want you to make shit funny that's good and lifts people and don't drag their face through a lot of shit.
Now he's just kind of lost his spark, in my opinion. And then the headlining comic, if you want to call it that, the person in William Montgomery's position, was Hans Kim. That's kind of who I assumed it was going to be. And when they introduced him, Tony made a big spiel about how he's been on hiatus because he's getting ready for this battle against Rick Diaz, Kia Forum, and made a big deal that he's been preparing, okay?
This man has been taking a hiatus in preparation for the Forum, the rematch between him and Rick Diaz. One of the greatest regulars in the history of the show. You watched him grow up from living in a van to being a wild, sellout, touring success. Sing it if you know the words. This is Hans Kim.
He comes on the show and his set was whatever, not great in my opinion. And then instantly when he's done with the set, sounded really pathetic and said he wanted to come back on the show, it seemed like more often. We'll play the clip.
I feel great, Tony. Thank you for having me back. I'd love to come back more.
Anytime. We love you, Hans.
And Tony said, anytime, Hans. You can come on anytime. Very confidently. I didn't believe that. I don't believe that. I think that it was a forced hiatus. And when Hans Kim is saying that he wants to come back on the show, Tony confidently says anytime, then his reasoning for wanting to come back on the show was because cocaine is expensive.
We love you, Hans. Literally anytime you want, you can.
Thank you, Tony. Cocaine's pretty expensive.
Now, in my opinion, that is probably the worst thing he could have said in this moment. Like, you've been gone for 3 months, supposedly preparing for this set, and the only thing you have to say is that cocaine is expensive, and your set sucked. So that leads me to believe that you've been on a cocaine bender this past 3 months, and you haven't been preparing for this battle against Rick Diaz. After he mentions that cocaine is expensive, Tony says, kinda sounds like a parent, and says, Hans, you back on the hard stuff?
Are you back on it? Are you back on the hard stuff, Hansi?
And Hans tries to lie about it for some reason, even though he's the one that brought it up, and says no.
No.
Doesn't take much pressure from Tony. All he goes, Hans, and instantly Hans backtracks and says, yes, he is.
Hans, did you just lie to me, Hans?
Yes.
To me, trying to hide it like that from Tony makes it seem like Tony does not want him to be on the drugs, and that was part of the stipulation with him going on his hiatus. My theory is that Hans is a coke addict and Tony doesn't want coke addicts or drug addicts on the show, especially not around recovering drug addicts like William Montgomery. So they keep the camera on Hans the entire time, so we can't really see how everyone at the table is reacting. Definitely doesn't seem like they're reacting well. Tony seems very disappointed, and they do cut back to Redban, or they cut back to the whole panel at some point, and Redban is shaking his head, definitely in disappointment. They ask him, okay, Hans, so what do you do when you're on cocaine? What does Hans do when he's on cocaine?
What do you do after you do cocaine?
First of all, not surprisingly, Hans says he plays Settlers of Catan on his phone, which, what a waste of time. 2, he says that he cleans his house,
I've been rearranging my house a little bit.
which is what I assume every drug addict does. Anyone that's on uppers, actually, probably, is probably cleaning their house. So that's a very drug addict thing to say, in my opinion. Not that cleaning your house immediately means that you're on drugs, but when you say that you're doing drugs and then you say what you do when you're on drugs is cleaning your house, that's to me, that's a drug addict thing to do.
And I want to let you know also, today I'm using this. We got a specific this past weekend tactical blade.
Ravencrest.
From Ravencrest Tactical. And they make this an illegal blade. You press a button and bam, somebody's naked or dead.
At first I was like, okay, coke, what a horrible thing to talk about. And then I'm like, all right, well, when you're a comedian, you need to be doing something in order to be able to talk about stuff on stage. So I was like, all right, maybe he wanted to do coke and his reasoning behind it was, I'm going to have stories to tell while I'm on coke. Except the stories that he comes up with are playing Settlers of Catan and cleaning his house. So not worth the coke stories, in my opinion. To me, it seems really weird that Hans would come back after 3 months and only talk about coke, basically, and he didn't appear in 12 episodes, despite being allowed, and suggested that he wanted to be on more, but I don't think he was. If we go back to his last episode before he went on hiatus, in the interview, Hans starts a
Silly
faggot
Billy.
chant, which is really interesting.
Silly Billy. Silly Billy. Silly Billy. Silly Billy.
Before he left the show, in my opinion, all of his sets were unnecessarily edgy for no reason, because I believe that he was trying to either get clips on Instagram to go viral or was trying to get canceled because he thought that's what makes comedians special, which is not, as shown by Matt Rife.
Silly Billy. Silly Billy. Silly Billy.
In that episode, they go over the phone call that Hans had with Tony in their agreement. So the official story was that Hans and Rick are going to be going up against each other at the Kia Forum on May 10th, right?
So I think the next one we do at the Forum.
Which just happened. And Hans is sitting there going on the show every week. They felt that Hans was wasting his minutes. Because he's taking all that energy and putting into minutes for each show, he's not going to be able to put the energy into his set against Rick Diaz, which they already had a little battle for New Year's Eve, and overwhelmingly people said that Rick Diaz won, which I don't like Rick Diaz at all. Dude needs to get on testosterone, but I wouldn't be surprised if he actually won and Tony just did not really want Rick Diaz to be on the show. So they just said that Hans won, which Shane Gillis said that Hans won.
Just the guest said I won last time. I said I did nothing.
Or no, I think Shane Gillis alluded to Rick Diaz winning. We'll drop a clip.
All right. Commentary, Rick's got the longest forearms I've ever seen.
There you go.
So that's what I'll go with.
So they say that Hans and Tony had a phone call and came to the decision that Hans was going to take a hiatus from the show to be able to focus on this battle.
Hans, we have come to a very, very interesting agreement, you and I, earlier on the phone. He is battling Rick Diaz in an unbelievably exciting rematch, right?
Yes.
So we realize that what's not fair is that Rick gets to prepare this super minute over months without having to spend any minutes or interviews on the show. So it would be fair to give Hans Kim a break. So unless he absolutely wants one, he will not be performing until May 10th, live at the Forum on Kill Tony.
And that was 3 months ago.
Later tonight, you will all meet the new regular that will open the shows every week here on Kill Tony.
So after his hiatus, then Casey Rocket is now introduced as the new regular on the same episode, at the end of the episode. Here's my thoughts on Casey Rocket. Casey Rocket, when I first saw him, I thought, wow, this guy's pretty funny, just like I think everyone else does. But when you do the same thing every single week, when your jokes are the same, you're doing the little crab walk thing, you have ADD and you just say random things, it's like that only goes so far, in my opinion. At some point, you're going to need some sustenance. And there's definitely times, like new minutes that he came out with, that I felt like were attempting to be something of sustenance mixed with his normal comedy. But whenever he tried to do that, it wasn't that funny. It's something that he probably, obviously, just like any other comedian, needs to work on, but you're not quite in the position to be a regular, in my opinion. And especially during his interviews, there seems to be a lot of lying or just making up random things, trying to be comedic, which is a very similar tactic that William Montgomery used in the beginning, and he still uses, but that would be William's thing then. So I would think maybe you should try and do something else, especially during the interview portion where it's like, all right, this is where we get to know you. This is where we get to see what Casey Rocket's all about. All of his answers all the time are just straight up bullshit. So it's not compelling at all. I don't even care. And so that's whatever. You don't deserve to be a regular comedian, in my opinion. So why would someone like Tony, who is supposed to be an expert in comedy, choose this person to be the regular opener for the show? Well, this is my theory with that. They know that he's not actually that great of a comedian and aren't actually that worried about it. What they're really worried about is warming up the crowd. And Hans, obviously based on his reaction that he got when he came back on stage for the first time in 3 months, people love Hans.
Thank you.
But he's not necessarily someone that's warming up the crowd. He's kind of boring. I don't know how it is there at the Comedy Mothership, but at the comedy shows that I've been to, when you first get in there, especially with local openers, usually you're like, okay, is this person funny? Are they not funny? And you're kind of like reluctant to just start laughing. You're kind of like, you know that the person you came to see is going to be funny and that's going to be good, but like you just came off the street from regular life and you kind of got to get into that mode of I'm at a comedy show. So what Casey Rocket does really well, in my opinion, is go out on stage and be extremely goofy and give people permission to laugh because it's so absurd. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think you should call it as it is. So who I would compare Casey Rocket to, and I'm reluctant to do this, but Casey, I would probably say is close to like Stephen Brody Stevens character, where Stephen Brody Stevens is an absolute legend. Casey is clearly not. Brody Stevens is a comedic genius, was a comedic genius.
Brody, you are the most beloved comic in the world today, and there's no question about it.
Casey's not. He still has time, though. You know what I mean? Casey can keep working on his skill, and everyone doesn't start out really good. Even there's clips I remember watching like 5 years ago of Brody Stevens kind of teaching Tony Hinchcliffe and his friend, I can't remember what his friend's name was, but teaching Tony and his friend how to be better at podcasting by not carrying the show. He would stop talking and say, all right, now you guys need to carry the show.
I'm Stephen Brody Stevens, and I'm going to hand it over right now to two great up-and-coming comedians. They're going to get 2 minutes to talk. Freestyle, you got it. Here it is, Brody's famous segment, 2 Medians to Talk. Freestyle, here they are, Tony, Benji, and go.
So, what do you think?
I think the podcast is going well so far.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And it was really uncomfortable. So that brings you back to a time where it's like, okay, Tony wasn't always really fucking good.
You got to pick up the energy, man. He's right. I basically walked off set, and the show followed me, and it shouldn't have. You should have said, hey, Don, you're calling Brody? Let Brody take 2 minutes. I'll talk to you. But you just sat back. You're too comfortable, man. Look at you guys. You're just you're two dudes. And that's fine. But you got to perform, man.
It took a lot of time, and I think the reason he's so good is because he did know Stephen Brody Stevens, and he kind of challenged him. That's why I'm reluctant to compare Casey Rocket to Stephen Brody Stevens, because in a way that's extremely offensive, because he's a legend. And I don't think there'll ever be a comedian quite like Stephen Brody Stevens. One of my favorites, by far. You got it. But that's my theory behind Casey Rocket, and that's why I'll usually skip his part of the show because I just don't really care that much to see someone come out, pull a picture out of their pocket, or do something with a harmonica and throw it. Like, I've seen it. I don't care anymore. It's great for people that don't know who he is, and it's great for warming up the crowd for the show. But I think that's all it really is. But another reason why I think that Casey Rocket was chosen is because he is a sober comedian. So I'm guessing if Hans Kim's last show was 651 or 652, 651 or 652, then we're going to 656 when Mark Norman, I believe it's 656. I'm Not 100% sure. But Mark Norman's on the show, and he mentions that Casey looks like the first half of the show Intervention. And Casey almost immediately says, no, I don't.
You look like the first half of the show Intervention.
It's not true.
And right after that, Tony starts talking about Casey's sobriety. So I think that was a major reason why Casey was chosen and Hans was gotten rid of. I think they were seeing that Hans had a problem. They were seeing that he wasn't bringing the heat, wasn't going above and beyond. And they were like, all right, well, we want to get someone on the show that's hungry, someone that wants to be here, and someone that's not going to be an issue around our other comedians that maybe have coke problems or have had coke problems in the past. And yeah, just based on different times that I've watched episodes with people talking about going sober, William talking about going sober, Casey talking about being sober, Redban is always kind of looking at them as if that is what he wants.
But I do appreciate that this is the first time I think all of us have seen William do a set completely sober.
That is impressive.
Yeah, this is the first time.
It's like he wants them to be healthy. He wants them to not be on drugs. He wants them to succeed. They want their comedy to succeed. They want them to be, successful and probably not die early like some other comedians back in the day, where a lot of legendary comedians back in the day were probably having a lot of drug problems.
He used to have a serious drinking problem, and that was his way of remembering the jokes. Now he's been sober for a year and a half, and he has run out of excuses.
Episode 574, William brings up how he misses cocaine and would love to do some cocaine.
Man, I've been missing the fucking cocaine recently. Anybody want it tonight? Okay, can you meet me in the bathroom after this? I really need to do some tonight. I'm not doing good.
So this is definitely something that William is still struggling with, despite being sober for, say, 2 years probably now, or maybe a little bit more, and looking as healthy as he's looked in probably 7 years. We'll go back and try and find a clip of him when he was younger and thinner, but...
So I've started doing cocaine with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like we hit it or whatever, and he just keeps on saying, I'll be back.
He definitely went off the deep end with the drinking and with the cocaine and was on track to an early death. There's more reasoning of why it's kind of interesting that Hans was lying about doing cocaine. I thought I would just look into some of the reasoning behind maybe why you would lie about your cocaine use to your employer. We're looking at denial and minimization. Lying about cocaine use often indicates denial or minimization of the problem. This is a common defense mechanism used by individuals struggling with substance abuse. It allows them to avoid facing the full extent of their addiction and the consequences associated with it. There's definitely trust issues here. Honesty is a cornerstone of a therapeutic relationship. So if a person is lying about their substance use, it can undermine the trust between them and their employer, and rebuilding this trust can be challenging. So what we see here with him coming back after 3 months and talking about having a drug problem is not going to help with that trust that him and Tony had. We're looking at relapse and a lack of preparedness. So admitting to issues with cocaine use immediately upon returning suggests that Hans may have relapsed or continued to struggle with his addiction throughout his leave, which indicates that the time that he was gone probably wasn't used as effectively as it could have been, either to address his substance abuse or to work on his set. A readiness for change. Successful recovery often requires genuine willingness to change and a commitment to sobriety. Lying about that drug use is a sign that Hans is not fully ready to embrace what it takes to quit doing cocaine. And this could hinder his progress and make a relapse or bender more likely. We're looking at an impact on his professional life. So being placed on a temporary leave, obviously, from the biggest comedy show in the world is a pretty serious consequence. And then failing to address the underlying issue during the leave and then admitting to struggling with the cocaine immediately upon the return means that Hans probably didn't take the opportunity to engage in a meaningful recovery or meaningful work while he was gone. And that's definitely going to impact his professional life in the future.
I feel great. I'm going to energize. I'm going to recharge. I'm going to come back better than ever. You know, a lot of people cheered for me on that night at the arena, and I'm going to work hard for them.
And finally, this one is pretty interesting. It's a sign of a need for comprehensive support. So in this case, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but this definitely highlights a need for a comprehensive approach to treatment. Hans would definitely benefit from an intensive outpatient program, inpatient rehab, counseling, support groups, and possibly medication-assisted treatment. So him doing this definitely shows that he probably actually needs professional help outside of just taking a leave of absence and trying to figure it out on his own. I mean, cocaine is a hell of a drug, right? Cocaine is a hell of a drug. So if he's struggling to get off of it and had a 3-month leave of absence and definitely struggled with doing it the whole time he was gone, I think that Tony and Joe Rogan may need to help this guy out if they actually want him to succeed in the future. Otherwise, he is probably a goner. He mentions that the reason he's doing it is because of his ex-girlfriend. So that's definitely a place that I would start, is separating him from her. Obviously, that's not up to anyone else because Hans is an adult, but that's the route I would probably take. So yeah, with all of that being said, that is kind of how I came to my conclusion that Hans and Tony did not come to some sort of agreement that he was going to go on hiatus so that he could work on his set, because if he did, that was an incredible waste of time. I mean, just that alone, to me, shows that you're not trying to show Tony that you're trying to be the best comedian that you can be. It shows that you are a drug addict and you don't deserve to be on the show. And as bad as Casey Rocket is at being a comedian, he's a great opener for the show and gets people laughing. So if I were Tony, I would definitely probably keep Casey in this instance. So those are basically my thoughts when it comes to that episode and Hans Kim's return after his 3-month hiatus. I'm open to hear other theories. I just thought this was interesting. I don't know if anyone else has the same thoughts about it, if anyone else came to the same conclusion, but that was immediately what I thought when I got done watching that episode. Like I said, I was excited to see Hans come out. I was excited to see him after 3 months, and he didn't live up to the expectations. So where we go from there, who knows? I'm excited to see if he will be coming back as a regular. If he's not back as a regular, I'm going to assume that I was right about this situation and that Casey Rocket is probably going to be taking over until Hans Kim can prove that he is not a coke addict. So if you guys thought that this was an interesting theory or thought it was stupid, go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe. I don't know how often I will be making videos, but whenever I come up with an interesting theory that isn't beat to death by other comedy commentarians, I will probably make a video out of it because that's the only way to get it out of my head. So that was my theory on Hans Kim. Sorry, Hans, if you watch this, but it is what it is. And we'll see you guys next time.
And that was Hans Kim, everybody. Make some noise for Hans, everyone.